Rome, the most powerful empire on earth. A place where generals decided the fate of nations and the Senate passed laws for millions. But true power, the kind that could crown or destroy an heir, was not always found on battlefields or in public speeches, but in the shadows of the imperial palace. There, in the heart of the Palatine, a young man of only 19 served wine at private gatherings that would never appear in official records. He was not just any slave, he was Marcus Claudius Marcellus, nephew of Augustus himself and designated heir to the throne. Educated to rule, married to the emperor's daughter, admired by the people. Rome saw him as the future, but in reality, he was being turned into a prisoner of a political game so dark that it would forever mark the history of the empire. The question is inevitable: how is it that the man who could have been the second emperor of Rome ended up trapped in a web of secrets, manipulation, and humiliation? What you are about to discover will not be found in official history books, because it was deliberately buried. And believe me, this is one of those stories that will change the way you understand power in antiquity. Stay until the end, because what you're about to hear reveals how the most intimate secrets became the deadliest weapons of the Roman Empire. To understand the dark story of Marcus Claudius Marcellus, we must first stop at the stage where it all unfolded. The year is 30 BC. Rome had just survived decades of civil wars that had bled the Republic dry. Gaius Octavius, better known as Augustus, was emerging as the most powerful man in the world. With his victory over Mark Antony and Cleopatra, Rome entered a new era, the Empire. But although the battles had been won, the real challenge was only beginning: maintaining power in an environment where betrayal could be born at any banquet, in any alliance, in any family. And here appears a key figure, Livia Drusilla, the wife of Augustus. A shrewd, calculating woman, with an ambition that equaled, or even surpassed, that of her husband. Officially, her role was that of imperial consort. In practice, she was a political strategist who understood better than anyone that the control of Rome was not secured only with legions or senate speeches, but with secrets. Livia knew that generals could be defeated in battle, that senators could be bribed or eliminated, but a man trapped by his own weaknesses would never free himself from his chains. And on that chessboard of power, she found in Marcellus, the young heir, the perfect piece to build her web of manipulation. Because while Augustus dreamed of shaping his nephew into a virtuous prince, Livia discovered a far more effective method, teaching him that power was not inherited, it was controlled from the shadows. Marcus Claudius Marcellus was only 12 years old when he entered the heart of the imperial palace. To the people, he was the future, the boy who one day would succeed Augustus on the throne. But within the marble walls, his education took a path no one would have dared to imagine. By day he received the training of an aristocrat: oratory, philosophy, military strategy. He was prepared to shine in the forums, to command armies, and to become the very model of Roman virtue. But when night fell, that same heir was led into settings where his role changed entirely. There he did not learn from books, but from glances, silences, and forbidden favors. Livia Drusilla, with calculated coldness, repeated to him that an emperor must know the weaknesses of men in order to rule them. And the best way to uncover those weaknesses was to be present in their most intimate moments, in things they would never confess publicly. Thus began the private dinners. Senators and generals came thinking they would discuss matters of state, but instead found young Marcellus serving wine, dressed in provocative tunics that were anything but innocent. They watched him, they tested him, and without realizing it, they became ensnared in a web of commitments from which they could never escape. For Marcellus, what at first seemed like a strange political game soon became his daily reality. He learned, with painful speed, that his body was not solely his own, it was a tool of power, as valuable as the empire's gold or the strength of a legion. And so, while the people saw him as an exemplary prince, in secret Marcellus was being turned into the centerpiece of a manipulation operation that was about to redefine Roman politics. As the years passed, what began as private dinners evolved into a perfectly designed system. Livia Drusilla had created a blackmail machine more effective than any army. The meetings no longer took place only in the imperial palace. Secret villas, built on the outskirts of Rome, served as stages for carefully orchestrated encounters. Each room was equipped with hidden compartments and strategically placed mirrors to record the smallest detail. Nothing was left to chance: who attended, what they desired, what they requested, and what secrets were revealed in intimacy. Everything was written down and stored in chests hidden under strict guard. Thus, men who in the Senate posed as defenders of morality were exposed in those nights in their most human weaknesses. And each of those moments was captured in Livia's hands. From then on, no vote, no appointment, and no decision of state was free from her influence. What is most surprising is that, for the majority of Rome, this power was invisible. Officially, Augustus controlled the empire with his legions and his political charisma. But in practice, many of his decisions were already conditioned by the network of secrets his wife was weaving in the dark. At the center of it all stood Marcellus, the heir. He was not only Livia's tool, but also the visible face of an operation that kept the most powerful men of the empire in suspense. And every gathering he attended did not only seal his personal fate, but also the destiny of Rome itself. Marcus Claudius Marcellus had grown up trapped in a game he never chose. But by the age of 17, something inside him changed. After years of being used as a pawn in Livia's web, he realized he possessed a power that not even she had foreseen. Every glance, every secret, every whispered word in those private meetings had been etched into his memory. He knew which senator was vulnerable, which general had secret ambitions, and which family lived under a shameful burden. Instead of serving as an instrument of blackmail for others, he began to wield that knowledge for himself. The first step was silent. With a coldness surprising for his age, he confronted one of the senators who had humiliated him most in the past. He did not do it with weapons or with public threats, but with what Rome feared the most: the exposure of its secrets. The result was immediate: gold, political support, and absolute silence. Marcellus had discovered that he could shift from victim to predator in a single move. His marriage to Julia the Elder, daughter of Augustus, was the turning point. Rome celebrated the union as a symbol of imperial continuity, but behind the curtains, that wedding became an alliance of intelligence and power. Julia, young and brilliant, soon grasped the reach of her husband's knowledge. Together they formed a couple that combined the legitimacy of imperial bloodline with a secret network of blackmail capable of bending the entire Senate to their will. Marcellus was no longer just the boy manipulated by Livia. He was now a strategist, a player who had learned to transform his own pain into the deadliest weapon in Roman politics. And Rome still had no idea what was about to be unleashed. With Marcellus at Julia's side, and Livia still pulling strings from the shadows, Rome witnessed the birth of an alliance that was never proclaimed publicly, yet controlled the empire with terrifying efficiency. The people saw a promising, charismatic young heir, and his wife, the emperor's daughter, fulfilling her role as future empress. But behind that facade hid a triangle of power. Livia wielded the archives of blackmail she had gathered over the years, Marcellus exploited the secrets he had memorized since adolescence, and Julia, with her privileged position at the heart of the court, completed the network with fresh and strategic intelligence. The secret villas around Rome became true centers of power. There, no one debated philosophy or laws, but favors, betrayals, and human weaknesses. Generals, senators, and merchants were invited under the illusion of influencing imperial decisions, only to end up trapped in situations from which they could never escape. Most surprising of all was that this machinery was not limited to men. Julia quickly realized that the wives of high officials were an invaluable source of secrets. She organized women's banquets where intimate conversations revealed what men would never dare confess in public. Thus, the circle of control expanded further, ensnaring not only the leaders but also their families. Rome believed it was living under a regime of stability and prosperity, but in reality, the empire's fate was decided among chests of secret documents, silk tunics, and banquets where trust was destroyed in the name of power. The hidden triumvirate of Livia, Marcellus, and Julia needed neither swords nor poison. Their weapons were secrets, and with them, they subdued the entire Roman elite. But no empire in the shadows can grow without awakening enemies. The web of blackmail that Livia, Marcellus, and Julia had woven was so vast that it inevitably began to crack. Too many humiliated senators, too many generals under control, too many families living under the constant threat of exposure. Resentment grew in silence, until it became conspiracy. The first to rebel were not the powerful, but the marginalized. The common brothels of Rome began to resent the competition of that aristocratic prostitution organized from the palace. They too knew secrets, they too had access to the weaknesses of the very men Marcello manipulated. And soon, those scattered pieces of information began to come together. Senators wounded in their pride allied with prostitutes and slaves willing to reveal what they knew. They gathered evidence, witnesses, and documents. They wanted to use Marcello's own weapon against him, counter-blackmail. But they underestimated him. Marcello was no longer the obedient boy molded by Livia. He was a cold strategist, capable of wielding information as both sword and shield. When he discovered the conspiracy, he did not resort to trials or public executions. His revenge was far more calculated, and far more cruel. One by one, the main conspirators began to die under circumstances that appeared accidental. A senator was found dead in a brothel, a victim of his own excesses. Another disappeared entirely after agreeing to a reconciliation meeting. Secret archives went up in flames before they could be used against him. Marcello had learned the ultimate lesson: it was not enough to blackmail enemies. Sometimes, it was necessary to eliminate them in such a way that their downfall served as a warning to others. The network did not merely survive the attack. It grew stronger. Rome understood that confronting the imperial heir was too great a risk, because he was always ready to strike back with the same poison that had marked him since childhood. Marcello's power seemed indestructible. He had survived conspiracies, eliminated rivals, and consolidated a web of secrets that reached every corner of the Senate. But even the shrewdest predator can fall by the very weapon he masters best. In 23 BC, the heir began to fall ill. At first dizziness and fevers, then unbearable pain and delirium. The official chroniclers would later claim he was the victim of a mysterious illness, or possibly arsenic poisoning. But the truth was far more sinister. Marcello was not defeated by swords, nor by poisons, but by the very ground on which he had built his power: sex. An enemy who had managed to escape his net plotted the perfect revenge. During an intimate encounter, Marcello was deliberately infected with an incurable venereal disease, which at that time amounted to a death sentence. The irony was devastating. The young man who had turned intimacy into a political weapon was slowly dying from the very strategy he had perfected. His final weeks were an agony that mirrored his own past, the pain, the degradation, and the humiliation he himself had used to subjugate so many. Livia Drusilla, the architect of his dark education, observed his end with the coldness of someone who knew she had won the game. The heir she had once molded was no longer necessary. With his death, she kept all the secret archives, consolidating a power that would pass directly to her son Tiberius. Marcello had been the prince destined to rule Rome. But his end made it clear that, in the halls of the Palatine, no one was indispensable. The game of power always devoured its pawns, even the most valuable ones. Marcello's death did not erase what he had built. On the contrary, his downfall was only the beginning of a practice that would shape entire generations of Roman emperors. The chests of documents, the lists of names, the evidence collected over years were not destroyed with him. Livia Drusilla ensured that every file was preserved and handed over to her son Tiberius, who inherited not only the throne, but also the most sophisticated network of blackmail in ancient history. From then on, aristocratic prostitution became a permanent instrument of imperial power. Young nobles were trained to serve as intimate spies, private parties were transformed into arenas of manipulation, and secrets gathered in the shadows weighed more than the swords of the legions. For centuries, this model of control was passed down in secret. It is even said that hidden manuals existed, the so-called protocols of the Palatine, with detailed instructions on how to use sex, blackmail, and extortion as tools of government. The Roman people never knew that many of the political decisions that shaped their daily lives were not decided in the Senate, nor on the battlefield, but in hidden rooms, in encounters that would never appear in official records. The case of Marcellus revealed an uncomfortable truth: absolute power was not sustained only by virtues or military victories, but by the control of the most intimate human weaknesses. And that dark legacy survived long beyond the short life of the heir who never got to rule. The story of Marcus Claudius Marcellus shows us that empires are not always upheld by swords or speeches. Sometimes they are built on secrets, humiliations, and shadows that never appear in official chronicles. The young man who could have been Rome's second emperor ended up both victim and victimizer. His body was used as a political tool, his pain turned into a system of control, and his legacy survived not in monuments, but in hidden methods that shaped the empire for centuries. And here arises the inevitable question: how many other empires, ancient or modern, have been sustained on equally dark foundations? Leave me your opinion in the comments. Do you think power always needs to rely on secrets and hidden manipulations, or is it possible to govern without them? If this story surprised you, share this video so that more people can discover the forbidden side of the Roman Empire. And don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell, because there are still many buried truths we will reveal in upcoming episodes. Rome wrote its history in marble and blood, but also with secrets it would rather never see the light of day.